Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is wonderful to be a living being in a state of relative health, even though it is also very conflicted, confusing, and sometimes lonely. But I am glad to be here today with you, alive with you virtually, as in my recording. But I imagine that we are all together. And recently I spent a lot of time in Stockton, California, where my father passed away. There's a bunch of money on the ground here, at least $50. So I picked it up. A dangerous and somewhat exciting moment. But it's funny that I was just about to remark on the profound difference between Stockton and here. When I would go for walks in Stockton, it was quite isolated. Oh, God. And very lonely. There was no one, essentially no one on the street in Lincoln Village West. And in Stockton, there being no one on the street would be considered usually, good luck. Because Stockton's a fairly rough and how should we put this? A rough and boring place. It's also extremely flat, unlike San Francisco. But walking around this morning, or actually this afternoon, there's so many people. And I was realizing that it's quite astonishing to be a human being. This is a rough time to be born in. There have certainly been far rougher times to be born in. And I think it's about to get a lot more rough. In pretty short order. But I was in line at the Arizmendi bakery where I often get a slice of pizza. And the diversity of the humans there was quite profound. And when I am near them, I have different feelings and orientations in different times and situations. It can be very intense. To be around the humans and their diversity. and their different, unique embodiments of the potential of humanity. Ordinarily, I take such things for granted. Of course, there are many humans. Of course, we are all together in the city, which is a very confusing and conflicting place to be, actually. Could be much worse, right? Could be on a battlefield or in a factory, in some sweatshop somewhere. Could be in a cargo box, being trafficked, or attempting to get to a new country with our family. Lots of worse things could surely obtain. But this morning, or this afternoon, I was just feeling how incredible it is, because well, if you're a materialist, and I strongly doubt that any materialists are listening to my podcast, though I guess it's conceivable. But if one's a materialist, then all of this is just an accident. It's a mechanical accident. There's no such thing as souls. Minds are an epiphenomenon of brain or metabolic function. And everything is explicable. Hey. Hello. There's no mystery, really. Well, I mean, there's some mystery, I guess, still. It's just that all mysteries will eventually be resolved into being an accident of mechanics. By the way, I consider that position to be not only ridiculous and absurd, but catastrophically relationally disoriented. Because from that position, relationships only matter trivially. And what I mean by that is, well, I don't need to go into a long explanation of that. So I don't think any of my listeners are materialists, though some might be. But what was kind of blowing my mind a bit this afternoon as I was in line waiting for a piece of pizza and a coffee is that all of these humans, we incarnated essentially in the same temporal window, right? So now we are all alive together on the earth at the same time. And this is a fascinating situation. And there are many ways to conceive of it. And I would ask that we conceive of it in at least 3 or 4 or 5 ways, not one. So, from one perspective, we are individual souls. Darren's soul is incarnated as Darren's body this time around. And Jolene's soul is over there. And there is Timaeus' soul. And there is Galactina's soul incarnated here in this line. There is Howard's soul, and so forth. So from one perspective, we're separate souls incarnating in the same temporal reference frame, such that it is possible for us to encounter each other while incarnate. From another perspective, there is one soul. Unity has precedence. And that soul is variously incarnating, and thus forgetting its unity, or being presented with the unique opportunity of recollecting its unity from within incarnation. And, we may think thoughts such as, all of these beings, they are me. Or all of these beings, they are the one from which I myself descend. Or all of these beings, these are like tendrils in the flower of God's soul. Or we may think, oh no, each of these beings is entirely distinct. Cannot be true, that last thing, but interesting to think it. And by the way, to go back to the materialist perspective, there are many perspectives that I do not hold. The perspective of the eliminative materialists particularly, and certain kinds of physicalists, I do not hold these perspectives. And yet, I think it's dangerous. There are perspectives whose results are dangerous. For example, if there's no being inside the body that can suffer, there's no reason not to inflict suffering. If everything's just a mechanism, there's no spirit in there, we can end up with lots of bizarre human behavior funded by perspectives that evacuate being. But although there are many perspectives I do not hold, I value most of them and would not want them well, it's complicated. I think what I'm trying to say is that I appreciate the existence of perspectives that profoundly contrast with my own. And often my own perspectives are deeply related to that contrast. Right? They are born, in a sense, from that contrast. So, at least intellectually, I appreciate the existence of profoundly intelligent materialists of various ilks, even though I don't agree. This is true primarily cognitively for me, meaning that Loud, noisy machines in the botanical gardens. Something I don't appreciate the contrast of, generally. So while I was in line, and all of the diverse humans were, there were many diverse humans all around me. Different ages, sizes, genders, orientations. And I felt just how miraculous it was that there's a place, our world, where we can all be together, no matter how divided we may become according to our creeds or beliefs or behaviors or vocabulary's failing here. Our chosen associations. And our unchosen isolations. And I felt for a moment very grateful and also fascinated and somewhat confused and filled with curiosity about this very strange situation where, why should it be that all these souls incarnate together at this time and end up in this spot, in this moment? Yeah. Right? Middle of 9th Avenue between, Irving and Judah, Saturday, January 20th, 2024, 1:40 p.m. or something, right? And an elderly gentleman familiar to me, Mario, approached me while I was in line and asked me a bunch of questions about, are you still doing martial arts? Who's doing it with you? What are you doing? You remember? All these things. And he's someone that I've pushed hands with once or twice. He knows the people that I learned, that I recovered. No, that's not even true. I have to correct myself 6 times just to make a statement here. He knows the people that I studied Tai Chi with somewhat recently. And so he was asking me many questions, which obviously, since we were talking somewhat loudly, in order to be heard above the street noise, obviously others were involved in our conversation, perhaps somewhat involuntarily. But right, they heard us. Okay, let's try this again. And we could hear others. We could hear the sounds of the cars and the people driving, and all of these things are happening, quote, at the same time, unquote. In the same place, right? we are all together there. And we're not really making the best of it. We're sort of putting up with it. The people on the street, in the line. But I was feeling the profound delicacy, the vulnerability, I was feeling the precious rareness of that particular momentary association of souls. And I was also noticing something peculiar to me, which is that I've always been, well, always is sort of not true, but I've always had a very peculiar aesthetic sense about humans and many other things. But I like, there's a certain, oh man, this is a huge problem for me, oh my God. Let us say that okay, where am I going to go here? I've written myself into a corner. I suspect that all of us have something similar to what I'm trying to describe here or talk about. But I have a compelling aesthetic sense of what I find affable or winsome. In human forms. And we all have affinities and antipathies. But as I was looking, like even how someone wears their shoes, right? I'm so prissy and picky about this. In my deep interiority, I rarely will opine on this matter to others unless we somehow find mutual fascination here. I will rarely speak of these matters. But yes, I have I mistrust it. On the other hand, I think many of our affinities and disaffinities, or, antipathies, may well have to do with having lived many, many, many incarnations. And I don't necessarily mean as a separate soul. Because I'm not sure there really is such a thing. I validate the perspective of separate identities. But I don't necessarily believe that perspective. So I was looking at the people, and then I was noticing my affinities and antipathies. And then I was sort of marveling at how complex and articulate they are. And I suppose I wanted someone intelligent or bright, curious to explore this topic with, which is partly how I ended up in this predicament of making a recording. If I could sustain the curious fascination, the loving, compassionate, beautiful, felt sense of the miracle of our that we exist at all, or that the existence can have any kind of continuity, because there's no reason to suspect that consciousness should ever be continuously coherent, right? One imagines some situation where one is just falling, say, down a mountainside after having been lit on fire somehow, and smashing into rocks and bouncing here and, and there, and just there's no reason why, in science and philosophy, one fundamental question is, why does anything exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? And I don't think we understand nothing very well, because emptiness, it's very unlikely that emptiness is that there's a sort of a purified absence somewhere, somehow. This anti-quantity we call nothing. Obviously, every time we look, the blank page is a analogy of nothing, but there's still a page, its blankness, and the mind perceiving it and categorizing it as nothing, right? So that's not nothing, not by a long shot.
Oh yeah, it's funny. Maybe we should talk about that, but I guess it's like
One of my particularly precocious friends, when she was a young child, she asked her mother some incisive questions about nothing. I think one of them was, what is the color? What color is nothing? And her mother said black, and she said, no, black is something. She must have realized the lexical problem of indicating pure absence of qualities. Right? We regularly and momentously underestimate the intelligence of children, because they, late at night or in midday, but certainly when they're in their bed, they probe the matrix of the forms of thought they are slowly importing from adults. And they are geniuses at this probing. If only their potential intelligence could find in the human world a context that understood its scope and power and potential, we would be raising gods and angels, not children. These would not become human. And in fact, my strange aesthetics regarding human physical form I think they have some spiritual basis, where I'm seeking modes of elegance that imply to my aesthetic senses, or perhaps some preternatural sense, that imply more than merely human nature, origin, form. I'm looking for angels and elves and fairies and so forth among the humans. And there's some aesthetic continuum that reminds me of such situations, incarnations, so forth. My apologies for the wind sound. It would be amazing if the spirit of insight that occasionally arises in my mostly relatively mundane awareness, it would be beautiful if that were constant and rich and deep. And certainly I hope for its preservation and propagation in my awareness. But most of the time, when I am by myself, when I am not with, intelligent others trying to see better, which is my common desire when with intelligent others, who, well, I guess we could leave that aside. Yes, I'm almost always trying to see better when I'm with precocious, often autodidactic others, which most of my friends are. And some of them marvel at me, and I marvel back at some of them. However, those who hold me in high esteem likely overlook my failings. And that is an encyclopedic catalog. My failings are profuse, common, and naturally find expression throughout the day. Whereas my virtues naturally find their inhibitions throughout the day, more often than their embodiments or enactions. Though I do chase what I understand as virtue. And I believe very deeply that virtuous. Okay. All right. Before I go here, I'm gonna go directly to the root, as I understand the root, consciously, cognitively. The root is probably the wisest move. Is probably absolute transparent clarity. No attachment, no identity. No affinity, no disaffinity, nothing to preserve, nothing to lose. Because only there can whatever is actually true perhaps dwell or be be embodied, enacted in the human form. So let me say that I trust that, even though that's a cognitive trust. I have little, if any, experience of such matters, even though I've long been someone who meditates. My meditations rarely approach anything like clarity or transparence or transpresence. But having said that, it is clear to me that some behaviors appear from within ordinarily confused consciousness to be better than others, right? And this is from the perspective of consciousness that is pregnant, if you will, with values. Right? So clearly it is dumb, for example, in this consciousness, with limited awareness of time and actually virtue itself and whatever the opposite of virtue is. Ignorance, probably, stupidity. It is clear that, running headlong into the tree in front of me, or punching the wall and shattering my hand or something, right? Or even saying that sentence. These are not virtuous acts. If we are aware of the power of speech, for example, which I have just failed to be, sort of on purpose, we will use that power with deep and careful awareness, respect, awareness of its profound effects on ourselves and others. And most of the time, we will avoid any kind of coarse discourse, speaking, swearing and defaming others, and defamation in general. We will avoid these things. Now, a few of us have the consistent awareness of the profound qualities and effects that speaking may have. And so we engage in all kinds of speech behavior, little of which is likely to be virtuous. There's some California sagebrush here. This is a plant that I love. When we use the power of speech, which I am doing now, we intone, right? We emit music. And the music touches the ears of anyone listening. And the human listeners, and perhaps other listeners, are transformed. Speech is fundamentally enchanting when it is not coarse. And so it is an incredible ability to make shapes, to make vibratory shapes in atmosphere on a planet with many, many different kinds of ears. Surely even the grasses and fungi and trees and so forth, they hear my voice. So it is virtuous for me to speak with care, attention, with love, in an attempt to enact the spirit of virtues, the spirit from which all virtues derive, which one might declare is no spirit at all. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, scent, taste, touch, thought, no seeing, and so on too, no thinking, no ignorance, and also no ending of ignorance, and so on too, no old age and death, and also no ending of old age and death, no anguish, cause of anguish, cessation, path, no wisdom and no attainment, as there is nothing to attain. This is the voice of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But I am a human being still. I am not a Buddha. If I am a Bodhisattva, I cannot tell. But I am a human being with a deep concern about virtue. And for some time now, someone very close to me has been engaged in a specific practice from the East that often leads to awakening. And I suspect that because we are close, some of their endeavors are leaking through to me, so that I am sensing and becoming aware of both my failings and the direction in which I might travel to embody virtue. And one of the first clear understandings that arose in this way was that I had been speaking, I thought I was being playful and humorous, but I had been speaking ill of someone who actually was helping me. I don't need to say exactly what was going on there. But I suddenly realized, there's a vocalization, right? I realized that not only was this behavior shameful, I also realized, what would it be like if the person in whom I had placed my trust and in whom was trust for me, what would it be like if they heard what I said? You know? And this was the sort of thing that, that young boys commonly experiment with, how to defame other children. Usually male children, but not always. How to insult them and hurt their feelings, so forth. And it's, wow, the size of that hawk. That is one of the largest red tails I have ever seen. It is enormous. Its wingspan is probably 4 feet. It was huge. You know, among the humans, bigness is associated with power. And there's really no specific problem with that. However, it is also misguided, because when a mythical person was given the task of sorting a vast storehouse of seed-sized material, it was the ants that solved the problem for her. They quickly sorted trillions of tiny grains into separate piles, thus resolving her conundrum. And all of the creatures who are large are made up, it seems, of creatures who are small. So it came to me one day that this behavior I'd been engaging in with one specific person was ignorant and dangerous, and cruel. And I felt ashamed, because though it is not my intention to cause harm, or to hurt the feelings of others, I was acting ignorantly. And I did stopped behaving that way. And I began to pay attention closely to situations where I might find myself inclined to defame others. So I began to shine a light in my awareness. A light that would illuminate any situation in which I began to veer from what I could imagine as virtuous speech. I'm still learning to pay attention. It's an infinite goal. Right? It's a direction, not a destination. However, and this is where things get interesting. Most of us are aware that there are people who decide to take a vow of silence. They will not speak anymore. I've had occasion to be with such people who are, in this case, monastic. And not all such people are monastic. But one can immediately see that it is very difficult to veer from the virtue in the dimension of speaking if no speaking is taking place. Right? You no longer have to concern yourself. Now perhaps the concern becomes the quality of consciousness or awareness and how we invest or hold back from the investment in certain modes and forms. And this brings me to the topic that motivated my recording today, which was not what happened in the bakery line. When I think about virtue, and I often do these days, as I approach my death, I am much more concerned with the ethical ethics of my life path and behavior. I have at various points had some concern for virtue, but I'm much more so now. And the second insight that I had after the one regarding the careful and articulate, loving and compassionate use of speech. If I am to speak, let me speak from the spirit of true beauty and origin, communion, adoration. But the second insight was stranger. And in discussion with someone close to me the other day, it came up. And it is as if we have before us a bowl of water. And whatsoever we attend or do or say or become involved with, it flavors this water. And it is as if there are 3 or 4 different bowls of such water, right? There's the bowl of the things I privately do in my own consciousness and behavior. And then there's concentric circles, right? There's the most intimate relationships. There's a bowl for that in my life. There's social relationships, acquaintances and so forth. There's a bowl for that. And then there's sort of what everyone does. There's a bowl for that. And thinks and sees and participates in. And normally we do not pay, ordinarily, most of us most of the time, don't pay careful attention to what we put into that water. But the water will hold not merely the flavor, but the values that whatever we are attending, doing, saying, convey. And some of those flavors and much of those values, especially in the public bowl, what everyone is doing, those are malignant. If we had to drink that water or give it to our children or deliver it to our ancestors as an offering, we would be ashamed. Again, from the perspective of, from the dualistic perspective of virtue and non-virtue, we would be ashamed. If I had to give my ancestors the water of my personal behavior, much of that soup would be poisonous and rotten. Even if I am relatively virtuous, still the aspects where I am not will overwhelm the delicate, nuanced flavors of the herbs of my virtue that I may have introduced to this water, you see. And so quickly one, from this perspective, realizes that so first of all, when will we have to drink the soup? Well, we have to drink it every day. We drink it in our dreaming. We will drink it at death. We may have to drink it just before birth, I'm not sure, or shortly thereafter, or both, or all of these places. We will drink the soup. And those we love will drink the soup, and those we don't love will drink the soup, and everybody will have to drink the collective soup. And that soup will produce active, lethal, violent, egregious harm to living beings and living places and the ancestral lines and futures of living beings. It will poison everything. That soup is very powerful. You know, you can see the analogy in the relationship between the humans in general, right, the species, and the environment. Mostly, they tear the environment to shreds to produce lethal poison and garbage and undesirable objects in endless profusions, billions of packets of ketchup or mustard or, you know, 1 trillion plastic forks a month or whatever. Obnoxico, as Buckminster Fuller called it. And by the way, read that guy. Yeah, read yourself some Buckminster Fuller. Because here was a man concerned both with the potentials of his human incarnation and with the soup. the water, the bowls of water. So, in such an analogy, and the soup is an analogy, but it's an analogy of something more than merely real. Where am I going here? It's funny. My transit to the thread of Buckminster Fuller erased its footprints back to its parent thread. And so I lost my place, so to speak. I'm going to digress for a moment and then I will return. Often this is helpful. I was walking up the street earlier during this recording, and I saw the money on the ground, and the streets are busy, so the money must not have been there very long. And I realized in picking it up that I was taking a variety of risks. One risk was that the person who recently dropped it might be nearby. And that person might see me as a thief, for they have just dropped the money and then I am picking it up. And they might respond to me as a thief. That's dangerous. That's not worth, whatever the outcome of that is, the money is not worth it. Then also, to gain from another person's loss, this is not virtuous. In fact, to be oriented toward any kind of gain at all, this is not virtuous. And particularly to be oriented toward material or representational gain, gold and silver and diamonds and houses and cars and so forth, money. Not virtuous. And so, as I was, so funny, because yesterday or the day before I made a video about what happens when the humans do something that captures the nervous system of animals, such as sirens and coyotes or peanuts and corvids. And then I am then subjected to precisely the situation I had been discussing in my videos. If you see money, if you see $50 on the ground, what are the chances you will simply keep on walking? And obviously, it should be obvious, but since we live in a world of humans, and even if we lived in a world of spirit beings and humans, it should be obvious that some of those humans and spirit beings and so forth set traps for humans to capture them and shrive them of some virtue or valuable commodity, canonically their soul. So as I was picking up the money, I had the same kind of concern that the little birds, when I give them a peanut, evince by their They don't just go toward the peanut and acquire it. They go toward the peanut and leap away from it, and toward the peanut a little more and leap away from it again, and so forth. And so it is clear that they are aware of the danger of something that captures their nervous system. You know, the money is contagious and malignant in that if it has acquired the spiritual results of its exchange, and what if it has acquired the metaphysical values and the agonies that its production and exchange produce in the living world and perhaps the spiritual world, then nothing is more dangerous or disgusting. I mean, I would be far better off picking up... Okay, now I have to be careful here. I am very good at producing hyperbolic analogies in language, but when I do so, I am avoiding virtuous speech because it makes the image of the hyperbole in the minds of my listeners. So rather than make a specific image, I will just say, picking up the money is probably worse than picking up something we would consider very disgusting and untouchable, yet I did so. I allowed myself to be captured in that moment by the representational layer in which I do participate and exist. And so its values overwhelmed the nuanced senses of my soul. And so there perhaps I sinned. Yeah. Very few people will walk past a stash of money they spy upon the street. But I'd like to know a few of them, and maybe to become one. So back to Bucky and the water. We make this water together. And the insight that occurred to me some time ago now, and I'm sure it was in conversation with someone close to me, but I also suspect it may be the result of a leak. Right? A leak in the between of the person who is studying and trying to grow into this Eastern wisdom tradition. And perhaps if we are making the soup together and we drink it even while yet we live, which I think we do, it's not a leak, it's a transmission. And the insight was something like this. When we are captured by what is common among the behavior and attentional habits and transactional habits and isolation habits of the humans, when we are captured, the soup becomes very murky and disgusting. And we lose something precious, something resembling degrees of freedom in the sense of our human capacity for development, learning, growth, play, wonder, awe, anamnesis, recollection, memory, fulfillment, development, the true rewards of actual virtue. We lose these, and they are replaced with like cardboard cutouts and advertisements and garbage. And we then traverse a path where we go from low-hanging fruit to lowest hanging fruit to rotten fruit on the ground to something even much more disgusting, right? Now we are eating from the corpses of dead things, right? And I've there done the thing I rejected doing earlier with my analogies. Thus speaking indelicately, doing the opposite of what I am saying. But also acknowledging that. So it turns out that if we wish to explore the benefits, so to speak, of virtue, virtue is unconcerned with such rewards. True virtue concerns itself with no. It is not concerned with being rewarded or getting something. It is probably concerned with not getting something. Not getting the results of action, attention, and behavior that are not virtuous. In other words, not traversing the path I described from better fruit to worse fruit to stuff on the ground to rotten things to, the next lower rung, and on and on and on, which is, I think, what most of what's going on, a lot of what's going on in our human lives, behavior, and experience, especially as moderns. The incredible luxury of not having to fight over food and resources for many of us produces all kinds of problems. This is why, in part, many cultures deeply value work. And the maxim, "the devil finds work for idle hands," is a reflection of what happens when luxury produces sloth, and spectating and gluttony and so forth, right? Intemperance and the opposites of virtues. So it struck me then that what preserves degrees of liberty, the freedoms, and the fruits of having avoided wrongdoing is often something we don't do, right? It is temperance. It is behaviors we refuse to engage in. Now look, we don't have to worry about these if the structure of our lives naturally rebuffs them. They bounce off the well-habituated daily structure of I wake at dawn, I meditate, I have a modest meal, I work very hard in the garden, to produce the food I eat, I rest briefly, I have a modest meal, I meditate, I work very hard, I have a modest meal, I sleep. This kind of a structure where meditation is shot through the day and there's no, one is too busy to engage in troublesome activities or concerns. And I don't mean to sound puritanical, but virtue is a real thing. And our defection from it is also real and profound. Now, it's true that such concerns only arise from a perspective that is dualistic, but let us be clear. There are probably 0 people who have cut through the mind who are listening. I am not one of them. I have spent a considerable amount of time attempting to do so, not succeeding yet. So the insight was that successfully resisting the urge to engage in behaviors that drag us down the ladder, the tree of liberation, resisting those urges potentiates liberty, flight, seeing from above, extrication from traps, liberation from habit, suffering, entrapment, addiction, soul loss, and so forth. And so, surprisingly, what we are able to become and see and do is often profoundly dependent on what we are not doing. Because it is as if we have 70 kinds of resources. Yes. But if we invest any of them over here in, let's say, defamatory speech about self and others, then we have 12 left. Right? And these are likely to be invested now that we have this first, bad investment. things are very likely to go south from there. It turns out that the aura of virtue is delicate, and once compromised, it's like the membrane of a cell. To kill a cell, you lyse the membrane, and so anything that contributes to the continuity and the wholeness of the membrane has a very profound effect. Right? In resisting defamatory speech, excuse me, this has a protective effect, a medicinal effect on the membrane of the cell of virtue. And so much of virtue has to do with not doing the things that compromise the membrane. And this produces vast benefit that direct acts of virtue also do produce. But the foundation appears to me to be not so much what is done, but what is not done. What we refuse to engage in. This potentiates the field of virtue in a very profound way that is trustworthy. And this is why we see the admonitions and prohibitions of the monastics and the religious. They are not simply out there yelling at stuff they don't like. Whether we are religious or not, whether we have any metaphysical sense or not, virtue is profound, and the effects of its opposites are staggering and devastating. Though we can see lives in which it appears momentarily, at least, that someone who is malign prospers. The reason for this is complex. I can see many things about it. I'm not sure if it's useful to go into them. Perhaps I can say something simple. When a stream of behavior or activity becomes prevalent in the incarnate culture of humans on Earth, one can ride within that stream and enjoy what appears to be certain protections from having to drink the soup we have actually composed for a time. But it seems true to my experience and awareness and perception that we will all drink the soup. There's no not drinking the soup. Eventually you have to drink it. And if it's nasty, it will not go well for those who have thus composed an icky soup. So it is often better to abstain from putting anything in the water, right? Hard to make a mistake that way. And then from there, from that awareness, the water is intrinsically better than bad soup, right? Always better. Water is always better than yucky soup. So, one strange admonition brilliant and ironic of the Zen teacher. Oh, can I recall his name? I do not know. Perhaps it will come to me. Only don't know. Right? That first word is really important because otherwise the whole thing becomes ironic. If I know that I shouldn't know, then I have knowledge of not knowing, which immediately becomes problematic. Yeah, only don't know. This is an admonition to let the water remain clear of ingredients. Hard to go wrong that way. Water will always nourish you, as long as it is not poisoned or intoxicated. But then there's sort of a secondary principle, which is if you will add something to the water, do so with an awareness of nuance, subtlety. Add something you are sure, you are relatively certain will make for good soup later and will not deteriorate, become moldy or rotten with time, and won't overwhelm the subtle integrity of the broth. Loving kindness is virtuous, but it's most virtuous when it is unintentional. Like one acts naturally from loving kindness without awareness that I am acting from loving kindness. Because once I am aware of virtue and the possibility of virtuous action, if I become attached to that, it then becomes ironic, right? Now it becomes self-invalidating in a strange recursive way. This is probably why the mind of no mind whatsoever is celebrated among the wisdom traditions. The mind of clear water, cloudless sky. The mind of beauty before before the awareness, before discriminating awareness, the beauty, this mind of beauty is celebrated. And it's very common that the celebration causes problems, because those inclined to such celebrations have probably already acquired a problem. Yeah.
It'd
be around the corner looking at the merch. Okay, good.
Right? If they are going to celebrate non-duality, this is dualistic. Nonetheless, for those of us, over on this side of the conundrum, right, where some degree of dualism pervades in awareness, thought, and behavior, then we, it's like preparing a garden. We are careful what we add to the soil. And we might want to import rich soil from an organic place, right? Unintoxicated place. And start with something good. Just as for the soup, we don't want water redolent with the flavor of chlorine. Right? Often the attempt to purify the water poisons it. So this is a common problem for us humans. This is why I say what is most trustworthy is to add nothing. But if we're going to add something to the water, and look, the goal isn't perfection here. If the goal is perfection, it's a problem, right? It's going to be a problem. What we want is we want to learn to see better, to recover abilities and skills, and we want to grow. Though this word is value-laden, what we want is progress in the sense of not we are right, but rather we are less wrong. I'm flinging little halves of peanuts to nearby sparrows. And it's clear that it's mostly the males who are getting them, because it's mostly the males who are aggressive enough to compete for them immediately. And unless one of the males is giving his share to a female, nearly none of the females are getting peanuts. This is pretty common among the birds. And there's one female who, she thought it was a trap, right? And by the way, so what, I often say, like, if you let me watch animals, I will learn something profound. So what am I learning here? What I am learning is the tropisms of the gender. Oh, finally, a female gets one. Yeah. I'm learning the tropisms of the genders among the sparrows. I'm learning something of them. But what I take from that is that the males will die far more often if there is a trap involving something that captures the nervous system of the birds. The males will, the 35 of them will die for every one female similarly trapped. And again, you can see here the principle of right? Walk past the $100 bill, which I failed. I failed to walk past a 50. But yes, it is my sense that virtue, when supported by a context with integrity, free of adulterants, is very profound. This potentiates liberty. It in the beginning, right, it creates an open space naturally inclined toward liberation. And so often it is what we do not do, that potentiates a future in which we may enjoy not so much the fruits oh, that's interesting. Not so much the fruits of our historical situations, but the absence of impediments. I am very grateful for this time together, for your attention, for sharing a way of seeing better together, ways of seeing better together, even if only briefly, in the strange predicament of physical incarnation. May your paths be blessed and beautiful and rich with loving kindness, wise and gentle and generous companions, good sleep and dreaming, good food and healing, good homes, good relations, good vocations. May you be blessed. I look forward to learning together again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye for now.